the Squadron, where us, the friends and family and associates of Julien Rae Browne, have come to remember his life. It's a celebration of a life of a man who had presence and character, who created indelible memories with all of the people that he knew. And I'm sure that many of those memories will be shared today as we remember Julien's life. I want to particularly welcome or acknowledge the presence of close family members. Barbara, of course, William and Nolene. William's getting into the front row as we speak. Julien's cousins Ray and Ev and their families. And there are those that can't be here today. Children Susan, Jacqueline and Emma, and grandchildren Emma and Oliver and Cameron and Jared, whose father William, Julien's son, died last year. There are some instructions for this event from Julien, and they are to remember that we are remembering a full and satisfying life. It is an occasion for recollection and memory, but not for regrets. One of the people who can give us some recollections from early on in the story is Julien's cousin Ray Davies. Ray, would you like to come up and give us your recollections of life with Julien?
Julien Rae Browne was born in London in May 1935, the eldest son of William and Myra Browne. Bill Browne, his father, was a geological engineer and surveyor employed by the Anglo-Persian Oil Company in their search to find oil in Persia, now Iran. His mother Myra was the only daughter of Captain and Mrs. Emma Emanuel, who had come to New Zealand from China in their retirement and bought property in Kerikeri. While Bill and Myra were here in 1934, they bought an island in the Bay of Islands, Motuarohia. I'm sure many of you know it. It's generally considered to be the most beautiful island in the bay, with its 4 lagoons, beaches on the leeward side, and the big flats covered with wild purple irises. Myra brought Julien to New Zealand to meet his grandparents when he was 6 months old, and she stayed until war broke out and she needed to go back. She returned to the UK, leaving Julien with, as she put it, with my mother, brother and sister-in-law for safekeeping. It was such a sad parting, and I know lots of families had the same situation. Our household comprised 3 generations. Our grandfather, Captain Emanuel, whom we all called Poppy, had a great influence on Julien, giving him a love of the sea and a great respect for it. He himself had been orphaned at 12, run away to sea, and gradually made his way up through the ranks until he became a master mariner in sail and then in steam. So I was just a few months younger than Julien in 1940, and we both started school on the same day. It seems that on that first day I was all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, while Julien had to be coaxed physically onto the bus. However, the very next day our roles were reversed. Julien had found a new world to explore, but I didn't want a bar of it. But very soon we began to see the initiative he's always shown, and there was 1 or 2 childhood things which I thought I could mention. Our house stood on the corner with dusty corrugated roads on both sides. And my father had a theory that you wouldn't feel the corrugations in a vehicle if you were travelling at the optimum speed. So Julien decided we should test this theory with my sister Evelyn, known as Ev, in her pram. We pushed the pram down the hill faster and faster, but we never achieved the requisite speed, and eventually the pram turned over and we were in trouble. Then I remember when we often visited a friend whose family had had an air raid shelter professionally built. It had a proper ladder attached to the wall, and it had seats inside and a lid which hinged over. When Julien and I got home, we felt that, our home was sadly lacking and every home should have one, and we found a secluded spot on the lawn and started to dig. We must have dug quite a lot more than I realised, because we found that the lawn never really recovered afterwards, and our efforts were not in any way appreciated. As the war dragged on, Poppy, Captain Emmanuel, became more and more frustrated, and before the family knew it, he'd put back his age 10 years. I don't quite know how you do this, but he managed, and been accepted for the Merchant Navy back in the UK, and he was part of the Atlantic convoys to Halifax in Canada. I did a bit of background reading to make sure I got my facts right, and I read that the Battle of the Atlantic lasted 2,074 days, from the day war was declared in September 39 to the 7th of May 1945, and which was the day that Germany surrendered, and Allied ships were sunk with loss of life nearly every day in between. Anyway, he did that, and eventually he came back to us. Julien, Eve and I attended a very small single teacher school set up by my mother Elspeth and various other expatriate mothers. And over the years we had a succession of teachers, culminating in a maiden lady of uncertain years who was known as Mr. Renzi, and she was not exactly the sort of teacher that any boy could relate to. She was very keen on literature and Bible lessons, and nothing she said or did had any appeal for that. We only had 2 or 3 boys at the school. Julien and she were at loggerheads from the very beginning. He claimed that he got the blame for everyone else's misdemeanours, and it was probably true. Eventually, it all got too much for Julien and another boy. And one day at lunchtime, they disappeared, and went round the back of the little old building and managed to set fire to it. Well, I think the caretaker saved the day, but it was lucky for Julien that VJ Day, the Japanese surrender, followed almost immediately, and Myra was able to send for Julien to get back to England. After demobbing, Bill, his father, rejoined his oil company, which by then had become BP, and he headed up BP's search for oil in the Bahamas. The waters of the Bahamas were very shallow, as some of you might know, and it was rumoured that there was lots of oil there. In fact, there wasn't enough to be economic, but they had 2 wonderful years in the Bahamas, in that wonderful climate. On Bill's next leave, which was the summer of 47-48, they took a house in Paihia and started to prepare for the home they would eventually build on Motor Row here, in their retirement, which was a few years away. Julien and I were due to head off to our respective boarding schools at that time, the beginning of February, but as luck would have it, it was the year of the polio epidemic, and we were sent all sorts of assignments to do by correspondence. And this of course never happened, and we managed to ignore them and spent most of the summer on Motor Row here, helping, so we thought. The only building still standing was a large ancient corrugated iron wool shed, and we slept there. Once we learned that the ghastly noise that started up every night was just the little blue penguins nesting under the building. Of course, there was no power, no telephone, no water supply, and no jetty on the main beach where they eventually built. Myra cooked on a tiny kerosene stove and, managed to make wonderful meals out of nothing. Bill set up a diesel generator, and he and Julien were successful at divining water with little divining rods on the flat nearby. And of course they had a regular VHF radio schedule with Richie Bromfield at Russell Radio in the evenings. Supplies for the island would arrive on the Fuller's boat on the Cream trip. The Noxie came by early on the upward run, and she would swing into the far end of the bay, come all the way along the beach towards us, and by the time she got to us, Julien would have rowed out in the little dinghy and taken delivery of whatever was coming. I can still see him struggling to take a 4-gallon tin kerosene from the Noxie above and into the dinghy and back to shore. It was a fantastic summer, but of course the schools eventually reopened and we headed off. Julien went off to Kings as a boarder, I was at Sliphouse. And some of you will know Julien as JR, which I thought was a sort of affectation he'd picked up somewhere along the way. But according to an interview that he gave, apparently Mr. Greenbank, who was the headmaster at King's at the time, said when Julien was introduced to him, Julien, you don't have any Juliens here. You will be known as JR. So that's how that happened. And that earned him Julien's undying gratitude. He'd always hated that name. Every year King's College had a senior ball, and King's College was at that time, of course, a single-sex school. And the senior boarders at our school were all agog to know which of us would have been invited. It was never an issue for me because every year the same thing happened. Just at the last minute, Julien would get in touch with me and say, the amazing girl I invited to the ball had A, broken a leg, B, left the country with a family, or some other unbelievable thing. And so I always got to go to the ball, and best of all, we didn't have to dance together, which pleased both of us. Julien left school in 1951, at which time he hoped to be a farmer. He had made lots of good friends amongst the boarders, mostly sons of farmers. Myra and Bill returned in due course, built their house, and stayed there until 1964, so they owned it for 30 years. During that time they hosted countless visitors and eventually built a lockwood on the mainland, which acted as a little bolt hole when the numbers got too great. However, in 1964, 2 fishermen found Bill out cold in his dinghy, washed up on the rocks near Orikawa. He had developed late onset diabetes, and so it was time to sell up. Motor Rohia was sold in 3 parts, and in later life, Julien tried very hard to buy back the eastern end, the part the family had loved so much, but without any luck.
And Ray's told you something about Julien's early life with our family in Kerikeri, and I'm going to mention a few things I remember about them, especially those which involve my children. Now, first, before I do that, just some general observations. Julien was up for anything in the work arena. Brett, my son, has described him as a serial entrepreneur, but before he reached those heady heights, he was a humble stable boy at Sir Wolf Fisher's farm in Pekeringa, and then he was a bushman in Taumarunui, and later an assistant at a funeral parlour in Birkenhead. Now, on a memorable day in 1958, I took a ferry to the North Shore to visit him. The last girder of the Auckland Harbour Bridge was being swung into place as the ferry passed below, and it was quite a spectacle. But I think the most impressive thing for me about that day was that Julien had to take me back to the ferry terminal later in time for his duties at the Undertakers. This was absolute news to me. Now, most of us can answer the question, where were you when JFK was shot? Don, my husband, and I were in Hamilton to attend a wedding. We got ourselves dressed at Julien's home. His wife was most terribly upset by this assassination, and Julien managed to be the perfect host. He went on being the perfect host to us through many occasions. It fell to me to tell him when Gar, our beloved grandmother, died. In a lengthy phone call, he reminisced about her and showed considerable compassion. He had been a really naughty small boy, Ray's told you a couple of things, who played tricks on her endlessly. I remember a snake with beads, horrible, but he had a deep love for her. That led to me asking him to be godfather to my youngest, Tess, who isn't able to be here today. By then we were all living in Wellington, Julien at Point Jerningham, and the McGowans in Lower Hutt. He came bearing gifts at Christmas and entertained the children, making a game with a humble candle snuffer. The way he could just turn his, able to do that sort of thing, make something out of nothing, was something I admired in him. He visited when Ray came to stay. Now Ray had two mischievous boys of her own at that time, and she came to have a short break away from Kerry. Julien offered to take her out. Ray imagined fine dining, music to match. He took her duck shooting. He entertained the children again at Taupo. What to do when you have a two-slice toaster and demand for cold toast. You put the toast in the fridge, of course. What to do when through a bad business deal you have possession of a house with a basement pool and sauna. You take the kids there to show them off this opulence, such opulence. What to do when you have a brand new Mercedes car. You amuse them with headlights that go up and down. That car, which was already driven fast, was nearly involved in a fatality when a load of timber was on the road in front of it. But fortunately, Julien was okay. We all shifted again. This time the McGowans lived on the North Shore and Julien in an apartment in Hobson Street. What an eye-opener to us all. An inner-city apartment with all home comforts and a view of a stash of tyres in the basement. Living there for a time were Julien's daughter Susan and the apple of his eye, his granddaughter Emma. Barbara has memories of times there, I'm sure. But Julien wasn't finished entertaining our children. He took them out on Spartacus and tolerated a misfortune. They had all just had the vaccinations necessary for living in Fiji, and there were some bad reactions going on. He didn't visit us in Fiji, but he did come to New York. He arrived on the doorstep with the heaviest case of tire tread samples you could imagine, and he stayed for a few nights. The first morning we couldn't find him. Yes, he was in a different time zone, and he had got up, taken Brett's bike, and gone for a whirl around the neighbourhood. He was actually in New York to work, and Don set him up in an office in Park Ave in Manhattan from where he could operate. We returned to New Zealand and to Wellington and were living there when our lovely Auntie Myra died. What a wonderful eulogy Julien gave her. I was so pleased to have travelled to Tauranga because so much of what he said was memorable and the empathy and resilience he showed was remarkable. Next stop for all of us, Auckland. The children were older and visits became less frequent. But we went to Coatesville and were impressed by the development of that property. And we went to Gulf Harbour to enjoy life in that environment. And Don and I went to the launching of Myra B. And that was an event. There was one family occasion which Julien missed, Tess's wedding. He was in hospital with a serious heart attack. Sadly later he had other health issues. But visiting him was rewarding. He was always so positive, charming the nurses, and entertaining all around him. What great memories he has left for us.
Thank you, Ev. Now, there are many people who can't be here today, but have sent their recollections. Some of them are short, some of them are longer, but each of them adds another strand of colour to the interesting life that we have heard about and we're here to remember. Just so you know who I am, I'm married to Doro, very fortunate person I am. Doro's brother, late brother Roger, was married to Ray, who you've heard from today. So I've got, I guess, an extended, super extended family connection with Julien. And I was able to do things like travel from party to party in the Hauraki Gulf. In fact, there are some people in this room who I met because we arrived at a party on Mairabi. I've also wrestled stags in Coatesville and experienced Gulf Harbour and Mairabi on many occasions. So my recollections are diverse and positive, and I'm honoured to be here today to help present those and others. This one's from Susan Keating. Firstly, thank you for attending today and providing your support and friendship to Barbara. The death of my brother William, followed by the death of my father in the space of a couple of months, has been heartbreaking. The loneliness is inescapable, and the distance from family at the time when you need them is confronting. My memories stretch back to 1962. I was 4. Papa was a handsome and strapping young 27-year-old father with 2 cute little girls born less than a year apart. He took us on epic adventures in his 1950s Land Rover, picking blackberries, picking up hay. He made us squeal with excitement when he participated in acting competitions, had us in fits of giggles in the playhouse he built for us. The best part was the stories about the family history, which continued until he took his last breath. Simply spellbinding. My daughter, Emma Rae Browne, would have to be his greatest achievement, and I'll be forever grateful for his unquestionable love and guidance provided to Emma. I am a proud first daughter of Julien Rae Browne. This one's from Emma. As a young girl, I used to think of JR as a giant. Then I had a growth spurt and he shrunk just a little bit. However, with time, I realised he was still a giant, but in other ways. He had a presence like few I've met in life. And when I think of my favourite memory of him, I always come back to his greeting, his smile from ear to ear, his bear hug and a loud booming "Hi ya em" across the room. It's hard to pinpoint the right words to describe him, as for me it was a feeling he created that I'm sure many of us can relate to. I remember his warmth, his positivity, his sense of humour, his charisma, and his ability to tell a great, yet exceptionally detailed story. These are the memories that I cherish and that will stay with me always. One from Australia, Ray Paul. Greetings to you all from Maroochydore on the Sunshine Coast. My name is Ray Paul. Thank you, Barbara, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words in honour of a true friend, Julien Rae Browne. First met JR around 1964 when he purchased a boat from me. Turned out to be a satisfactory deal for both of us, from which developed a fantastic, lasting friendship. And over the years, we shared many wonderful trips together, including a safari from Alice Springs through indigenous settlements out to the Giles Meteorological Station in Western Australia. On our arrival in Alice Springs to meet the rest of the group, we were informed that we could not take any alcohol into the Aboriginal territories. Quite a shock to both of us. Other trips included a train trip from Brisbane to Cairns, a cruise in my 39-foot cruiser to the Whitsundays, and a tour of the Margaret River wineries. The dawn fishing competition in Taupo is also part of my memory bank of enjoyable times shared with my mate JR. On this occasion, it was bitterly cold out on the lake, but JR provided the warmth. A carton of Lokanora liquor. It went down exceptionally well, but the fishing, needless to say, was very poor. Like a Boy Scout, he was always prepared. This excursion and many others have left wonderful lasting memories of camaraderie, companionship and generosity. JR was an honest, forthright, hard-working man with very high principles. These attributes enabled him to be very successful in his varied business life. A charismatic man, he attracted a wide circle of friends from all walks of life. But we all understood that, like it or not, he would call a spade in no uncertain terms when the need arose. That was the nature of the man. He was also a seaman extraordinaire, in whom I had the utmost trust and confidence. His knowledge and love of the Bay of Islands, where he had spent much of his boyhood, was astounding. It was JR who proposed me into the Squadron, with the comment that there are few people who remain friends after a boat deal. Very true words, spoken in jest. On a personal level, he was always prepared to support a friend when the need arose, and fortunately, there were a few times when I was able to reciprocate. In early 2011, I received a request from him, asking if I would act as his best man when he and Barbara married. As I had had plenty of practice in the past, I'd acted as best man 9 times previously. Badly worded, they were not all for JR. I agreed on one condition, that he would do the same for me. JR and Barbara and Bev and I were married in a simple ceremony on a beautiful spring day at the Coolum Resort. We both married wonderful women, and it was an honour to share this special ceremony with them both. JR, I'm so glad we were able to catch up with you last February and share a joke or two. You leave behind so many wonderful memories. You'll always be remembered, sadly missed. Goodbye, old mate, Pooley. Here's one from Patrick Brodie. Patrick Brodie explains that he's one of JR's friends. 3 a.m. in the morning as he writes this, from his present home with a background of masts and giant hulls at Martha Cove Marina on the Mornington Peninsula. Similar, I guess, to a view some mutual friends here at the Squadron can already see from the windows around him. What an apt setting to raise a glass or two in tribute to our mate J.R. Browne. I believe you can judge a person by their friends. Well, JR certainly had plenty of them. Faith and I, as two of his good friends, readily acknowledge it would have been difficult to collect attractive odds on JR making a ton, but all would agree he certainly packed a lot into the time he was here. I'm not sad now, but I certainly was the last time JR and I spoke, because we both knew it would be our last conversation. So please raise a glass for me of a rich red wine and toast a great mate, an extraordinary gentleman with whom I spent many happy hours. He was truly unique, and it requires no repeating here of our many special moments. He was so special you will all right now be remembering some of your own. Faith and I, newly married, first met JR in 1961. Already married he was, with 2 beautiful daughters, when we moved into the adjoining company flat in King Street, Hamilton. We were both salesmen for Cable Price. The company had the franchise in those days for the best machinery one could imagine. JR sold tractors and I chainsaws. You would think such a difference in size and cost of product would separate our competitive spirits, but no, that was not to be. A fierce competitive spirit was heated up by our striving to be named top salesman in our mentor Trevor Hawkes newsletter every month. Our children ensured our competitive work spirit stopped at the front door, and it proved a great foundation for nearly 60 years of great friendship. All through our lives, we both worked long hours, and I acknowledge now a special thanks to Abby and Susan, who were great companions and entertainers, as Faith nursed our firstborn, Michelle, prior to both families building our first new homes. I was the first to leave Cable Price, but our mutual friends and interests there were to stay with us as we both followed our dedicated career paths. It was almost eerie over the following years how closely our opposing careers were to dovetail. Opportunities for us both in business meant we all lived the high life in the hectic 70s and 80s. Drinking a beer on the back step of King Street, we could never imagine my company would one day build JR's own home in Wellington, or visualise the events we would witness together in the years ahead, or how our paths would truly cross. We saw Peter Snell on my birthday in 1962 break the 4-minute mile. With our mate Dick Twistleton, we shared the moment when New Zealand won its first Rugby World Cup. And in 1981, we were there when Trevor Chappell made his worst cricket decision by instructing his younger brother Trevor to bowl underarm to Brian McKechnie. I know right now many of you there today are already musing over your own special moments with JR. So I hardly need to share my own, except to say I treasure mine. Perhaps this is an apt moment to recall the last sentence of Rudyard Kipling's If. If you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And what is more, you'll be a man, my son. JR was just the kind of guy individually capable standing out in any company, or to just shut up and be a friend and to enjoy together special moments. Together we saw with pride our families grow, our companies prosper. We even saw fear and fun together. Such opposing moments as Kealoha blowing a motor in a gale off Cape Runaway, or a mad millionaire showing off his Sipta Maserati on a gravel coastal road in New Caledonia, or even JR surprising all present with his version of the chicken dance in the German exhibit at the 1988 Expo in Brisbane. COVID-19 has stolen the opportunity for many of JR's diverse number of friends to share this moment. But be assured we can all recall easily events, moments, and memories of a guy with a ready wit and always time to speak with a friend. Things didn't work out for me in New Zealand, so I moved to Noosa. But our friendship continued. As all know, everyone knows, to JR the Tasman was just another ocean to travel. I have a flood of memories of an impulse phone call from JR to see a rugby or cricket match that could be coming up anywhere. That would establish a reunion for both our diverse groups of families, friends, staff and associates. Evenings filled with wonderful dinners and loads of laughter. Countless hours spent holidaying in our batch in Queen Charlotte Sounds and travelling to many wonderful venues. That gave JR and I the opportunity to lay bare our memories and goals. I can promise you, neither of us would have reached 80 years with any regrets. JR lived with an infectious enthusiasm, still making puns, still generous, and filled with even more wisdom, and most of all opportunities to communicate with his family. Who's your family? May not be the people you're related to by blood. If you knew or were a friend of JR, you were part of his family. Please share with Barbara your thoughts and prayers, and leave today thankful for the special moments you all enjoyed with one of nature's gentlemen. Tomorrow, the 27th, I celebrate here in Australia my own 81st birthday. Be assured there will be a special toast to a very special friend. Lots of love to you, Barbara, family and friends. Patrick and Faith. Rhodey. Here's one from Anne. I'm so very disappointed that I cannot be at the Squadron today to pay my never-ending respect and express my love and gratitude to my amazing papa. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you all for being here for me. My grandfather helped shape me into the person I am today. I will miss his encouragement, his wisdom, most of all his cheeky smile and laugh. And while I feel like I've lost part of me, I know that I will always have him with me. Our summer trips away on Grand Banks and then the Myra B are undoubtedly some of the most wonderful moments in my life. He was always teaching me something and was so incredibly patient with me, even when I hooked his arm with a massive game fishing lure that I thought was a fancy toy. We would sit on the back of Myra B for hours with my little fishing rod and Sheba, his lad, and he'd tell me all sorts of wonderful stories about our family and his adventures. Most evenings, I would be curled up in his lap in front of the TV and we would be sound asleep within minutes, and he'd say, just having our 40 winks. Those are just some of the fond memories that I'm grateful I can call ours. My father was bigger than life, as you all know. He was a man with great conviction and a man that led an extraordinary life. As I reflect back on my memories of him, I often turn to the last visits that I shared with him and his wonderful wife, Barbara. Think about the last glass of wine we shared, the conversations that we had, the trips we made together, and the amazing advice that he shared with me over the years. My father led a full and great life and was lucky enough to spend his last years with Barbara, the all much love and joy. I would like to share an inspirational message with you all that I shared with Dad a few years ago. I wish you enough sun to keep your attitude bright, no matter how grey the day may appear. I wish you enough rain to appreciate the sun even more. I wish you enough happiness to keep your spirit alive and everlasting. I wish you enough pain so that even the smallest of joys in life may appear bigger. I wish you enough gain to satisfy your wanting. I wish you enough loss to appreciate all that you possess. I wish you enough hellos to get you through the final goodbye. I believe in my heart that he fulfilled all these wishes, and that makes my loss of him a little easier to bear. The world is just a little dimmer now, a little less fun. We've lost a great man. I will never forget his great laugh, great love of life, and the lasting impression that he has left on me. My life is richer, but I could call him Dad. My life is sadder now that I will never hear his voice again, or be the recipient of his great hugs. Now there may be some in the room who wish to add their comments, observations, or recollections by way of a eulogy. If there's anyone who would like to do that, please come forward now and take the microphone. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, we've had a wonderful resume of JR's life, and I'm going to try and add to that. I thought I might tell you about one disappointment he had. And Ed mentioned that he visited us in New York, and I managed to set him up on an office in Park Avenue, looking down on Waldorf Astoria. Now, Julien was a member of this club, this New Zealand Yacht Squadron, as was his father, who was a major contributor to Squadron's monthly articles. And Julien was very proud of his association with the Squadron, and I was a member too. So in New York, when we were talking about going to lunch, I said to Julien, shall we go next door to the Waldorf Astoria? He said, no, let's go to the New York Yacht Club. So I mentioned that because we have a challenge here at the moment, and it is probably appropriate, and we're in the Squadron's rooms. He rang up the New York Yacht Club and said, could we join for lunch? We are both members of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron, and we would love to come and meet some of your members. The response he got was, we don't accept people from New Zealand. That was one disappointment which Julien had in his life, because he really loved this place and it was a big part of his life.
Thank you, Don. And those of us taking notes about how to treat the New York Yacht Club, I'm with you. Best we do it on the water. Nolene, please, come on over.
Prepared anything, of course, but just on behalf of William, or Bill, my husband, and our family here today, we have Anna, our eldest one, and Peter, our youngest, the in-between ones in Sydney, unfortunately, Australia, and our 3 granddaughters. But I'd like to just add to Ev's recollection of Julien being with our families. And Julien spent a Christmas with us one year, and Myra was there too. And Myra had boiled a wonderful Christmas pudding. It came out of the bowl, beautifully rounded, and of course Myra boiled the coins that went into the pudding. And so the pudding was served. I think Myra had brandy on the pudding, all the flame, wonderfully made and presented. And our children had their sections of Christmas pudding, or with the brandy butter, forgot that. Yeah, that was great too. And the children hunted through it. Oh yes, I found a 1 cent coin. oh, I found 5 cents or 10 cents. And Julian was looking at his pudding and pulled out and was pushing it with his spoon. I found $100 bill note. Yeah. Julian he'd put $100 note in his pudding, and our children couldn't believe their eyes to see a $100 note. I thought, well, that's typical Julian. But I'd just like to add how generous Julian was. He was, every family occasion, we were welcome to his home on Mairabi, all his boats. Along the way, he was so generous. Hospitality was second to none, just amazing. So thank you, Julian. Thank you, Barbara, for having us here. This is a super occasion. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you very much for that. It's like another one of the Chronicles from Kalahari. Julien, as you know, regarded the planet as his backyard, really. Visited plenty of it, often, frequently. And I think it's most appropriate that his ashes have been divided into 3. One will be cast, scattered in the United States, another in Australia, and today, Barbara will cast New Zealand ashes into the ocean here in the Waitemata Harbour off the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron as the final stage in today's memorial occasion. So she's going to do that from a pontoon that's visible from these windows here. You're welcome to, at the conclusion of this, to follow Barbara down the stairs and round to the pontoon, or you can remain here and watch from the window. So, before Barbara takes that journey, one more comment. Under the wide and starry sky, look to the sea and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I've laid me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from the sea, the hunter, home from the hill. Here's to remembering Julien Rae Browne. Thank you.